The dust kicked up in swirls behind the stagecoach as it rocked violently over the rough terrain, carrying Eliza Keller toward a future she hadn't chosen. Through the small window, the vast, unforgiving landscape of Wyoming Territory stretched before her, painted in shades of amber and rust beneath the setting sun of 1871. She clutched her mother's worn journal to her chest, the only possession she truly valued among her meager belongings. The other passengers, a portly businessman and an elderly couple, had long since given up attempts at conversation after Eliza's terse responses made it clear she preferred silence to small talk. "Sloan comin' up, folks," the driver called out, his voice barely audible over the rumble of wheels. "'Bout 10 minutes." Eliza straightened her simple blue dress and adjusted the bonnet that framed her chestnut hair. At 22, she had already experienced more hardship than most women twice her age, but the rigid set of her shoulders and determined glint in her hazel eyes spoke of a woman who refused to be broken. The death of her parents had left her with no choice but to accept her uncle's invitation to live with him in Sloan, a place she'd never heard of until his letter arrived 3 weeks ago. As the stagecoach rolled into town, Eliza took in the single dusty main street lined with weathered wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon called the Rusty Spur, a small church, and various other establishments. Men in worn cowboy hats lounged on porches or led horses to hitching posts, while a few women scurried about their business, eyes downcast. The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the town's only hotel. Eliza waited for the other passengers to disembark before gathering her 2 bags and stepping down onto Wyoming soil for the first time. The driver handed down her trunk, tipping his hat perfunctorily before climbing back into his seat. "Miss Keller." Eliza turned to see a man in his 50s with a silver-streaked beard approaching. "Uncle Vernon," the man nodded, awkwardly reaching for her bags. "Welcome to Sloan. Sorry to hear about your folks." "Thank you for taking me in," she replied stiffly. "Well, your family, ain't you?" "Come along, I live just down the way, own the blacksmith shop." As they walked, Eliza couldn't help but notice the stares directed her way, some curious, others openly hostile. "Pay them no mind," Uncle Vernon muttered. "Folks here are just wary of newcomers, especially women they don't know." "Why especially women?" Eliza asked. Her uncle hesitated. "Sloan's had its share of troubles. Some folks are superstitious, is all." Before she could press for more details, a commotion erupted from the saloon. A man came flying through the swinging doors, landing hard in the dirt street. He was followed by a tall figure who stepped calmly onto the porch. "That'll teach you to cheat honest men," the standing man said, his voice low but carrying across the quiet street. Even from a distance, Eliza could see the striking figure he cut broad-shouldered with a worn leather vest over a once white shirt, dark trousers tucked into dusty boots, and a hat pulled low over his face. A gun belt hung around his hips, though he hadn't drawn his weapon. "Who is that?" Eliza whispered. "That's Thomas Navarro," her uncle replied with a mix of respect and wariness. "Best tracker and horseman in 3 counties, works his own ranch outside town, comes in for supplies and the occasional drink, keeps to himself mostly, but he's fair one of the few around here who is." As if sensing their attention, Thomas Navarro turned his head. For a brief moment, his eyes met Eliza's across the distance. Something passed between them, a spark of recognition though they'd never met, a connection that made Eliza's breath catch. Then he nodded slightly, touched the brim of his hat, and disappeared back into the saloon. "Come on," her uncle said, tugging at her arm. "Best get you settled in before dark." The small room at the back of her uncle's home was sparsely furnished but clean. After unpacking her few belongings, Eliza joined her uncle for a simple dinner of beans, cornbread, and coffee. "Tomorrow I'll introduce you around," Vernon said. "Mrs. Holbrook at the general store mentioned needing help, and the schoolteacher's been looking for an assistant." "I'd appreciate that," Eliza replied. "I need to earn my keep." Vernon nodded approvingly. "Just be prepared, some folks might not take to you right away." "Because I'm a newcomer, partly that." Vernon stared into his coffee. "Truth is, Sloan's got a history with women coming from outside." Last three who arrived, one fell ill and died within a month. Another's husband was killed in a mining accident not 2 weeks after they settled, and the third brought typhoid that took 5 children. That's hardly their fault, Eliza protested. Tell that to grieving mothers or widowers. Folks started saying any woman who comes to Sloan from outside brings misfortune. They call it the curse. He looked embarrassed. It's nonsense, of course, but folks cling to such notions in hard times, and they believe I'm cursed. Eliza couldn't keep the incredulity from her voice. Some do, others know better. Just tread carefully is all I'm saying. That night, Eliza lay awake on the narrow bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Wyoming night. From somewhere in the distance came the mournful howl of a coyote, answered by another farther away. She thought of the man she'd seen, Thomas Navarro, and the intensity of his gaze, wondering what his story might be. Sleep came slowly, bringing dreams of dust storms and a rider on a black horse, face obscured by shadow, always just ahead of her reach. Morning arrived with the crowing of a rooster and the clang of metal from her uncle's blacksmith shop. After a quick breakfast, Eliza donned a practical brown dress and pinned her hair into a simple bun before joining her uncle for the promised introductions. The general store proved to be their first stop. Mrs. Holbrook, a stern-faced woman with graying hair pulled tightly back, eyed Eliza with undisguised suspicion. "So this is your niece," she said to Vernon, not bothering to address Eliza directly. "She have any experience with shop work?" "I worked in my father's hardware store back in Ohio," Eliza offered, refusing to be cowed by the woman's obvious disdain. Mrs. Holbrook sniffed. "Different sort of clientele here. Men don't like being served by women they don't know." "I'm a quick learner," Eliza replied evenly. "We'll see." "You can start tomorrow, 6 sharp. Pays $2 a week, no advances." As they left the store, Eliza noticed a group of women gathered near the church, their hushed conversation stopping abruptly as they spotted her. One of them, a blonde woman in a fine blue dress, made the sign of the cross. "Fools," Vernon muttered. "That's Martha Wilkins. Her husband owns the bank, thinks it gives her the right to pass judgment on everyone else." Their next stop was the small schoolhouse at the edge of town. The teacher, Miss Peabody, proved more welcoming than Mrs. Holbrook, though caution still lined her features. "We have 28 students," she explained as she showed Eliza around the one-room school. "Ages 5 through 16. Many of the older boys only attend in winter when ranch work slows." "I had some teaching experience in Ohio," Eliza said. "I helped instruct the younger children. That would be most helpful. I find myself overwhelmed at times, especially with the little ones." Miss Peabody hesitated. "I should warn you, though, some parents might object to your presence, because of this supposed curse." Eliza couldn't keep the edge from her voice. Miss Peabody flushed. "I don't hold with such superstition myself, but it's deeply rooted here. 3 years ago, a young woman came to teach. Within 2 months, a fever swept through the school. We lost 4 children." Her voice quavered. "She left town shortly after, but the damage was done. Diseases happen everywhere," Eliza said gently. "Surely people understand that. Understanding and feeling are different matters. Grief seeks something to blame." The teacher straightened her shoulders. "Nevertheless, I would welcome your assistance. Perhaps 3 days a week to start, $1 per day." As they stepped back onto the street, the rumble of approaching horses drew their attention. 5 riders entered town from the east, led by a man whose very posture exuded authority. His expensive clothes and the quality of his horse set him apart from his companions. "Who's that?" Eliza asked. Vernon's expression darkened. "Samuel Blackstone. Owns the biggest ranch in the territory, the Diamond B. Those men with him are his hands, do whatever he says, legal or not." Blackstone slowed his horse as he spotted Eliza, tipping his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "Well now, Vernon, who might this lovely creature be?" "My niece, Eliza Keller," Vernon replied stiffly. "Just arrived from Ohio." Blackstone's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Welcome to our little town, Miss Keller. I do hope you find your stay uneventful." The implied threat wasn't lost on Eliza, but she met his gaze steadily. "Thank you, Mr. Blackstone. I intend to make myself quite at home." A flicker of surprise crossed his face before he chuckled. "Spirited." "How refreshing." He turned to Vernon. Remember, blacksmith, those horseshoes for my men need to be ready by Friday. As Blackstone and his men continued down the street toward the saloon, Eliza noticed another rider approaching from the opposite direction. Even before she could make out his features, she knew it was Thomas Navarro. He rode a magnificent chestnut stallion with a black mane, his posture relaxed but vigilant. As he drew closer, Eliza could see his features more clearly: strong jaw darkened with stubble, straight nose, and eyes the color of weathered sage. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with sun-bronzed skin that spoke of mixed heritage. Blackstone and his men had dismounted outside the saloon, but upon seeing Navarro, Blackstone stepped back into the street. "Navarro," he called out, "still trespassing on my grazing lands." Thomas reined his horse to a stop, his expression calm. "Public land, Blackstone. You don't own every blade of grass in Wyoming." "Yet," Blackstone replied with a cold smile, "just a matter of time, perhaps." Thomas's gaze flickered briefly to Eliza before returning to Blackstone. "Until then, I'll graze my horses where they please." "One day that attitude will cost you, half-breed," one of Blackstone's men called out. Thomas didn't react to the slur, but Eliza noticed his knuckles whitening on the reins. "Was there something else, Blackstone, or can I get on with my business?" Blackstone stepped aside with mocking deference. "By all means, I'm sure you have important affairs to attend to." As Thomas guided his horse past, he nodded politely to Eliza and her uncle, "Miss Keller, Vernon. You know my name?" Eliza couldn't help asking. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. News travels fast in small towns, especially when it concerns beautiful women from back east. Before she could respond, he continued on his way toward the general store, leaving Eliza staring after him with a flush rising to her cheeks. "Best not to get mixed up with that one," Vernon warned as they walked toward the saloon, where he intended to introduce her to the owner. "He's decent enough, but he's caught between two worlds. His mother was Shoshone, father was a Mexican vaquero. Folks like Blackstone will never let him forget it. He seems perfectly civil to me," Eliza replied. Vernon sighed. "Just be careful, girl. Sloan doesn't take kindly to those who challenge its ways." The next morning, Eliza reported to the general store promptly at 6. Mrs. Holbrook set her to work immediately, having her scrub the floors before customers arrived, then relegating her to inventory in the storeroom. By midday, Eliza's back ached and her hands were raw, but she refused to complain. During a brief lull as Mrs. Holbrook stepped outside to speak with the butcher, Eliza heard the bell above the door chime. Looking up from the ledger she was reviewing, she found herself face to face with Thomas Navarro. "Good afternoon, Miss Keller," he said, removing his hat. His dark hair fell in waves to his collar, still damp with sweat from his morning's work. "Mr. Navarro," she replied, straightening. "How may I help you? I need some supplies." He handed her a list written in a surprisingly elegant hand, "And please call me Thomas." As she gathered the items: coffee, sugar, bacon, ammunition for a Winchester rifle, Eliza felt his eyes following her movements. "How are you finding Sloan?" he asked. "It's different from Ohio," he chuckled, a warm sound that made something flutter in her chest. "I imagined so." "The people giving you trouble?" Eliza paused in her counting of coffee beans. "Some seem to think I'm bringing disaster upon their heads simply by existing." "The curse," Thomas nodded, "foolish superstition. Yet you don't seem affected by it." "I've had my share of being blamed for things beyond my control." His expression grew distant, makes a man skeptical of such accusations. Mrs. Holbrook chose that moment to return, her face souring at the sight of Thomas. "I'll handle this, Eliza. You can go back to the storeroom." "No need," Thomas said smoothly. "Miss Keller was assisting me just fine." He placed money on the counter. "This should cover it." As Eliza wrapped his purchases in brown paper, he leaned slightly closer. "Be careful who you trust here," he murmured. "Not everyone who smiles at you wishes you well." With that cryptic warning, he donned his hat and left, leaving Eliza to endure Mrs. Holbrook's disapproving glare for the remainder of the afternoon. That evening, as Eliza helped her uncle prepare dinner, she asked about Thomas's background. "His mother was from the Wind River Shoshone," Vernon explained as he sliced bread. His father was one of the original vaqueros who came north with the cattle drives. They had a small spread near here until both died of influenza when Thomas was 16 or so. He worked as a hand for various ranches, saved every penny, and eventually bought his own land about 5 miles west of here. Raises the finest horses in the territory. And Blackstone, what's his quarrel with Thomas? Vernon hesitated. Blackstone wants Thomas's land. It has the best access to the river for miles. Offered to buy it several times, but Thomas won't sell. There's also. He trailed off. Also what? Thomas's mother saved Blackstone's son once years ago. Boy fell through river ice. By all rights, Blackstone should be grateful to the Navarro family, but instead it seems to eat at him being indebted to a Shoshone woman. That's absurd, Eliza said. That's the West, Vernon replied with a shrug. People carry their prejudices like badges of honor out here. Over the next 2 weeks, Eliza settled into a routine mornings at the general store, 3 afternoons at the school, and evenings helping her uncle with meals and mending. The townspeople remained largely aloof, though a few like Miss Peabody and Sheriff Adams treated her with cautious courtesy. Thomas Navarro appeared in town regularly, always making a point to stop by the general store when Eliza was working. Their conversations remained brief, but increasingly warm, much to Mrs. Holbrook's evident disapproval. One afternoon, as Eliza was walking back from the schoolhouse, a sudden downpour caught her by surprise. With no umbrella and the rain falling in sheets, she ducked under the overhang of the livery stable, resigned to waiting out the worst of the deluge. Miss Keller. She turned to find Thomas leading his horse into the stable. He was already drenched, his shirt clinging to the muscled planes of his chest. Mr. Navarro, she acknowledged, feeling suddenly self-conscious as water dripped from her own sodden clothes. Caught in the rain, I see. He secured his horse in a stall before approaching her, shrugging out of his long duster coat. Here. Oh, I couldn't, you're shivering, he pointed out, and I'm already soaked through. Reluctantly, she accepted the coat, wrapping it around her shoulders. It carried his scent leather, pine, and something indefinably masculine. Thank you, she said softly. Wait here. Thomas disappeared into the back of the stable, returning moments later with a blanket. This is cleaner than it looks. Sit down, might as well be comfortable while we wait. They settled onto a bench just inside the stable doors, watching the rain transform the dusty street into a river of mud. For a while, they sat in companionable silence, the patter of rain on the roof creating a cozy cocoon around them. I've seen how they treat you, Thomas said finally. It's not right, Eliza sighed. They're afraid. Fear makes people cruel. Is that what they taught you in Ohio, to forgive those who mistreat you? They taught me to understand that people are complex. Understanding doesn't mean accepting mistreatment. Thomas studied her face, his expression thoughtful. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone broken by grief, perhaps. Your uncle mentioned you'd lost your parents. Eliza looked down at her hands. Influenza, 6 months ago, 1 week apart. I'm sorry, he said, and the simple sincerity in his voice touched her more deeply than all the formal condolences she'd received. It still feels unreal sometimes, she admitted. Like I'll return to Ohio and find them waiting. That feeling never entirely fades, Thomas said, his gaze distant. But it changes, becomes something you can carry without being crushed by it. Is that how it was for you, when you lost your parents? He nodded slowly. My mother had a saying, grief is the price we pay for love, a steep price but one worth paying. Something in his understanding broke through the careful composure Eliza had maintained since arriving in Sloan. To her horror, tears welled in her eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered, turning away. Don't be. His hand covered hers briefly, warm and calloused. There's no shame in mourning. They sat in silence until her tears subsided. When she finally looked up, the rain had slowed to a gentle patter. I should get back, she said. My uncle will worry. Thomas nodded, rising to his feet. I'll walk with you. That's not necessary. Humor me, he said with a small smile. The streets will be muddy, and that dress doesn't look made for wading. As they walked through the glistening aftermath of the storm, Eliza was acutely aware of the townsfolk watching from doorways and windows. Thomas maintained a respectful distance, but stayed close enough to offer his arm at particularly muddy crossings. You realize this will only fuel the gossip, she murmured as they approached her uncle's house. Let them talk, he replied, unconcerned. I've been the subject of whispers since I was born. At her door, Eliza slipped off his coat. Thank you, Mr. Navarro, Thomas, he corrected gently. And you're welcome, Eliza. The sound of her name on his lips sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with her damp clothes. Will I see you tomorrow? She asked before she could stop herself. Something warm kindled in his eyes. Count on it. True to his word, Thomas appeared at the general store the following day, ostensibly to purchase supplies. The day after, he happened to be outside the schoolhouse as Eliza finished her afternoon classes. By the end of the week, their accidental meetings had become a regular occurrence, much to the consternation of the town gossips. One evening, as Eliza helped her uncle close up the blacksmith shop, Vernon cleared his throat awkwardly. Been meaning to talk to you about Navarro, he began. What about him? Eliza kept her tone deliberately casual. People are talking. Mrs. Wilkins cornered me after church Sunday, said it wasn't proper, you spending time with him unchaperoned. We've hardly been alone, Uncle. We've simply talked in full view of the entire town, Vernon sighed, setting down his tools. I know that, and you know that. But this is a small town with small minds, and Thomas, he's a good man, but his position here is precarious. Because of his heritage, Eliza couldn't keep the edge from her voice, partly. And partly because he stands between Blackstone and what Blackstone wants. I'm just saying, be careful. For both your sakes. Before Eliza could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of the saloon. Raised voices and the sound of breaking glass drew them outside, where a crowd had gathered. In the center of the street stood Thomas, facing down three of Blackstone's men. Even from a distance, Eliza could see blood trickling from a cut on his cheekbone. Say it again, Thomas was saying, his voice dangerously quiet. I want everyone to hear what you just called her. The tallest of Blackstone's men, a red-headed brute named Calhoun, sneered. I said you're sweet on that cursed eastern bitch. Guess you two deserve each other, the half-breed and the harbinger. Thomas moved with startling speed. One moment he was standing still, the next his fist connected with Calhoun's jaw, sending the larger man staggering backward. The other two ranch hands rushed forward, but Thomas was ready, ducking under a wild swing and delivering a punishing blow to the second man's midsection. The third attacker managed to land a glancing blow to Thomas's ribs before Thomas countered with an uppercut that dropped the man to his knees. Calhoun, recovering his balance, reached for his gun, but before he could draw, the sharp report of a rifle froze everyone in place. That's enough. Sheriff Adams stood on the saloon porch, his Winchester raised skyward. Next man who throws a punch or reaches for iron spends the night in my jail. Calhoun spat blood onto the dirt. He attacked me, Sheriff. After you insulted Miss Keller, Thomas countered, breathing hard but still standing tall, in terms no man of honor would use toward any woman. Sheriff Adams' gaze swept over the scene. Is that true, Calhoun? Before the ranch hand could respond, Martha Wilkins pushed through the crowd. It hardly matters what was said. That woman, she pointed at Eliza, who had moved closer without realizing it, has brought nothing but trouble since she arrived. Now she's turned men to violence. Murmurs of agreement rippled through some of the onlookers. That's not fair, Miss Peabody interjected unexpectedly. Eliza has been nothing but helpful at the school. The children adore her. And you'll feel differently when they start dying of whatever curse she's brought, Mrs. Wilkins retorted, just like last time. There is no curse, Thomas said firmly, only ignorance and fear. Easy for you to say, Calhoun sneered. You're already an outcast. What's one more mark against you? Thomas turned slowly to face the crowd, his gaze finding Eliza's across the distance. They called the women cursed, he said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden hush. Well, I say if caring for a woman of intelligence and courage makes me curse too, then I'll share their curse proudly. A ripple of shock passed through the crowd. No one had ever so openly defied Sloane's deeply held superstition. You'll regret that, Navarro, Calhoun warned. Blackstone won't take kindly to you interfering with his men. Blackstone doesn't own this town, Thomas replied evenly. Not yet. Sheriff Adams stepped between them. That's enough. Calhoun, take your friends and clear out. Navarro, you two, go home, cool off. As the crowd began to disperse, Thomas's eyes found Eliza again. The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. With a slight nod, he turned and walked toward the livery where his horse was stabled. Come on, Vernon murmured, taking Eliza's elbow. Let's get inside. Later that night, as Eliza prepared for bed, a soft knock sounded at her window. Drawing aside the curtain, she was startled to find Thomas standing in the small yard behind her uncle's house, his face partially illuminated by moonlight. After a moment's hesitation, she unlatched the window and raised it slightly. "What are you doing here?" she whispered. "I needed to see you," he replied, keeping his voice low. "To make sure you're all right. I'm fine, but you're injured." In the moonlight, she could see the cut on his cheek had stopped bleeding but looked painful. "It's nothing." He glanced over his shoulder before looking back at her. "Eliza, I'm sorry for what happened today. I never meant to make things worse for you." "You defended me," she said softly. "No one's done that since I arrived." Thomas moved closer to the window, close enough that she could smell the familiar scent of leather and pine. "What they're doing to you, treating you like you're something dangerous, it's wrong. Reminds me too much of how my mother was treated." "Is that why you stood up for me? Because I remind you of your mother?" Even in the dim light, she could see his smile. "No. You're nothing like my mother, except perhaps in courage." He hesitated. "I stood up for you because in the few weeks you've been here, you've shown more grace and strength than most people I've known my entire life." Eliza felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Thomas, I know it's too soon," he continued quickly. "We barely know each other, but I feel drawn to you, Eliza, in a way I can't explain." Before she could respond, the creak of a floorboard inside the house made them both freeze. "My uncle," Eliza whispered. "You should go." Thomas nodded, but before stepping away, he reached through the window and gently took her hand. "Meet me tomorrow, by the old cottonwood near the river bend just past noon." "I shouldn't, please." His fingers tightened briefly around hers. "There's something I need to show you." The earnestness in his eyes made refusal impossible. "All right. Past noon." With a final squeeze of her hand, Thomas melted into the shadows, leaving Eliza to close the window and press her fingers to her flushed cheeks, wondering what she'd just agreed to. The following day dragged interminably. At the general store, Mrs. Holbrook was even more sour than usual, muttering under her breath about women who didn't know their place. At the school, several parents arrived to collect their children personally, eyeing Eliza with undisguised suspicion. When noon finally arrived, Eliza told Miss Peabody she had a headache and needed to leave early. The teacher, who had become something of an ally, didn't question the excuse, simply nodding sympathetically. Instead of heading toward her uncle's house, Eliza took a circuitous route that led her to the river that curved around the eastern edge of town. The cottonwood Thomas had mentioned was unmistakable, ancient, and massive, its gnarled branches providing a canopy of shade beside the flowing water. Thomas was already waiting, holding the reins of his chestnut stallion and another horse, a dappled gray mare with intelligent eyes. "You came," he said, relief evident in his voice. "I said I would," Eliza replied, approaching cautiously, "though I'm not sure it was wise." "Probably not," he agreed with a small smile. "Few of the best things in life are wise choices at first glance. What did you want to show me?" He gestured to the gray mare. "First, I thought you might enjoy a ride. This is Willow, gentlest horse I've trained." Eliza approached the mare, stroking her velvety nose. "She's beautiful. But I didn't bring a riding habit. No one will see us where we're going," Thomas assured her. "And Willow doesn't mind unorthodox riding attire." After a moment's hesitation, Eliza nodded. "All right." With Thomas's help, she mounted the mare, arranging her skirts as modestly as possible. He swung easily onto his stallion, and they set off along the riverbank, away from town. They rode in companionable silence for nearly an hour, the landscape gradually changing from flat plains to rolling hills. Thomas led her through a narrow pass between two bluffs and into a hidden valley that opened suddenly before them like a secret garden. Eliza gasped at the sight. A crystal-clear stream wound through lush grass dotted with wildflowers. A small cabin stood near a copse of aspen trees, smoke curling from its chimney. Beyond it, A corral held several magnificent horses that lifted their heads curiously at their approach. "Welcome to my home," Thomas said quietly. "It's beautiful," Eliza breathed. "I had no idea such a place existed so close to Sloan. Few do, that's part of its charm." He dismounted and helped her down from Willow. "The valley is sheltered from most weather, good grazing year-round, plenty of water, and hidden from Blackstone's covetous eyes," Thomas smiled. "That too." He showed her around the property, the corral where he trained horses, the small garden where he grew vegetables, the spring house where he kept milk and butter cool. The cabin itself was simple but well built, with a main room containing a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, and a table crafted from polished pine. A curtained doorway presumably led to his sleeping quarters. "I built most of it myself," he explained, watching her examine a bookshelf filled with volumes on horse breeding, Western exploration, and surprisingly, poetry. "Added to what was already here when I bought the land." "It suits you," Eliza said, running her finger along the spine of a book of Wordsworth's poems. "Though I wouldn't have taken you for a poetry reader. My mother taught me to read with poetry, said it showed how beautiful English could be." He moved closer, taking down the volume she'd been examining. This was hers. The intimacy of the moment standing in his home, sharing something so personal, made Eliza acutely aware of their solitude. "Why did you bring me here, Thomas?" He set the book down carefully. "Because I wanted you to see that there's a place beyond Sloan, a place where you wouldn't be judged or feared." His eyes held hers. "A place where you could be yourself." "I barely know who that is anymore," she admitted. "After my parents died, I felt lost. Coming here was supposed to be a fresh start, but instead I'm defined by superstition and ignorance. Not by everyone." Thomas took her hand gently. "Not by me." The warmth of his touch sent a tremor through her. "This is madness. We've known each other barely a month." "Sometimes a month is enough to recognize what matters." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "I've watched you face their cruelty with dignity, seen your kindness to the children, your patience with your uncle, your determination to make your own way despite everything." Eliza's heart thundered in her chest. "Thomas, I'm not asking for promises," he said quickly. "Just a chance to show you that what they call a curse I see as a blessing." Before she could respond, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. A kiss so gentle it was barely more than a whisper. When he started to pull away, Eliza surprised herself by following, her hands finding his shoulders as she returned the kiss with unexpected fervor. For a suspended moment, the world narrowed to the sensation of his mouth on hers, his hands cradling her face as though she were something infinitely precious. When they finally parted, both were breathing raggedly. "I shouldn't have done that," Thomas murmured, though he made no move to increase the distance between them. "No," Eliza agreed, her fingers still curled in the fabric of his shirt, "but I'm glad you did." A smile transformed his face, making him look younger, unburdened. "We should get back." "Your uncle will worry." "Yes," she sighed, reluctantly stepping away. "Though I wish we could stay." As they rode back toward Sloan, the sun beginning its descent toward the western mountains, Eliza felt a lightness she hadn't experienced since before her parents' deaths. Whatever consequences might come from this afternoon, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. What neither of them noticed was the rider watching from a distant ridge, observing their return to town with cold, calculating eyes. The following morning brought unwelcome news. As Eliza arrived at the general store, Mrs. Holbrook met her at the door with undisguised animosity. "I won't be needing your help anymore," the older woman announced. "Mr. Wilkins has informed me that the bank will no longer do business with establishments that employ women of questionable character." Eliza stiffened. "Questionable character? On what grounds? You were seen returning from an unchaperoned outing with that half-breed Navarro." Mrs. Holbrook's lips pinched disapprovingly. "In this town, that's grounds enough." Fighting back angry tears, Eliza straightened her shoulders. "Very well. I assume my wages through yesterday will be paid." Mrs. Holbrook grudgingly counted out the money owed, practically shoving it into Eliza's hand. "Best find passage back east, girl. You're not wanted here." With her head held high, Eliza left the store, only to find Martha Wilkins and several other town women waiting outside. "Well, if it isn't Sloane's latest curse," Martha said loudly enough for passers-by to hear. "Not content with bringing misfortune, now she's consorting with savages." "Thomas Navarro is twice the person you'll ever be," Eliza retorted before she could stop herself. Martha's eyes widened at the defiance. "You admit it then, shameless hussy." "I admit to riding with a gentleman who has shown me more kindness than anyone in this town." Eliza met the woman's gaze steadily. "If that makes me shameless in your eyes, so be it." As she turned to leave, Martha grabbed her arm. "Your kind isn't welcome here, neither is his. You'd best remember that before something unfortunate happens." The threat hung in the air between them, unmistakable. Eliza yanked her arm free. "Are you threatening me, Mrs. Wilkins?" Simply stating facts. Accidents befall those who don't heed warnings. A crowd had gathered, watching the confrontation with avid interest. From the corner of her eye, Eliza spotted Miss Peabody hurrying toward them, concern written across her features. "Eliza," the teacher called. "I've been looking for you. We need to prepare for today's lessons." Grateful for the interruption, Eliza nodded stiffly to Martha Wilkins and moved to join Miss Peabody. As they walked toward the schoolhouse, the teacher leaned close. "I heard what happened at the store," she murmured. "It's outrageous." "Apparently I've graduated from being merely cursed to being morally compromised as well," Eliza replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Because of Thomas Navarro." When Eliza nodded, Miss Peabody sighed. "He's a good man. My brother hired him to train horses last year, said he'd never seen anyone with such a natural gift. But this town sees what it wants to see," Eliza finished. "Will I lose my position at the school as well?" Miss Peabody hesitated. "The school board meets tonight." "I won't lie, there's pressure, but I'll fight for you, Eliza." The day passed in a haze of tension. Several parents arrived to collect their children personally, making a show of keeping them away from Eliza. By afternoon, half the class was gone. Miss Peabody looked increasingly distressed, but maintained a calm facade for the remaining students. After the last child had left, Eliza began straightening the classroom, her movements mechanical. "Eliza," Miss Peabody said softly, "I'm so sorry about all this. It's not your fault." Eliza managed a wan smile. "You've been kinder than most." "What will you do, if the board—" "I don't know," Eliza admitted. "My uncle's taken me in out of duty, but I can't be a burden to him indefinitely." Miss Peabody squeezed her arm sympathetically. "Whatever happens, know that not everyone in Sloane shares these backward views." As Eliza walked home, the weight of the day's events pressed heavily upon her. The whispers and stares that followed her progress through town seemed louder, more malicious than before. By the time she reached her uncle's house, her composure was hanging by a thread. Vernon looked up from his newspaper as she entered, his expression grave. "Heard about what happened at the store," he said without preamble, "and about your excursion yesterday." "Are you going to lecture me as well?" Eliza asked wearily. Vernon sighed, setting aside his paper. "No, girl, I'm going to tell you to be careful. Blackstone was in the shop today talking with some of the men. He seems particularly interested in your friendship with Thomas." A chill ran through Eliza. Why would he care? Because anything Thomas values, Blackstone wants to destroy. Vernon leaned forward. "Listen to me, Eliza. Blackstone isn't just wealthy, he's dangerous. Men who have crossed him have disappeared. Nothing proven, mind you, but everyone knows." "What are you saying, Uncle?" "I'm saying that your association with Thomas has drawn Blackstone's attention, and that's not a good place to be." He rubbed a hand over his face. "I don't want to see either of you hurt." Before Eliza could respond, a knock sounded at the front door. Vernon rose to answer it, returning moments later with Sheriff Adams. "Evening, Miss Keller," the sheriff said, hat in hand. "Sorry to disturb you, but there's been a development I thought you should know about." "What is it?" Eliza asked, dread pooling in her stomach. "Thomas Navarro was ambushed this afternoon on his way back to his ranch. 3 men jumped him about 2 miles outside town." Eliza's hand flew to her mouth. He's alive," the sheriff assured her quickly. "Beat up pretty bad, but alive. Doc Simmons is with him now." "Where is he?" she demanded, already reaching for her shawl. "At the doc's office. But Miss Keller, there's more." The sheriff glanced uncomfortably at Vernon. The men who attacked him were wearing masks, but Thomas is certain they were Blackstone's men, says they had a message for you. What message? That the curse is spreading, that anyone who stands with you will suffer. Eliza's blood ran cold. This is my fault. No, Vernon said firmly. This is Blackstone's doing. He's using the town's superstition to further his own ends. I need to see Thomas, Eliza insisted. The sheriff shook his head. That might not be wise. Town's on edge already. You showing up at the doctor's would only fuel the fire. I don't care, Eliza replied, her voice steady despite the fear churning inside her. Thomas defended me publicly. I won't hide while he suffers for it. Vernon and the sheriff exchanged looks. I'll go with her, Vernon decided. Safety in numbers. The doctor's office was on the far end of town, a small building attached to his residence. As they approached, Eliza could see lights burning in the front room. Sheriff Adams knocked, and after a moment, Dr. Simmons opened the door, his spectacles perched on the end of his nose and blood staining the front of his shirt. Sheriff, Vernon. His gaze settled on Eliza, not unkindly. Miss Keller, I suspected you might come. How is he? Eliza asked, straining to see past the doctor into the room beyond, battered but not broken. Dr. Simmons stepped aside to let them enter. 3 cracked ribs, numerous contusions, a nasty cut on his forehead that needed stitching. He's lucky they didn't use knives or guns. Thomas lay on an examination table, his torso wrapped in bandages, his face a map of bruises. Despite his injuries, his eyes brightened when he saw Eliza. You shouldn't be here, he said, his voice raspy. That seems to be the general consensus about me everywhere in Sloan, she replied, moving to his side. Yet here I am. A pained smile tugged at his swollen lips. Stubborn woman. Sheriff Adams told me what happened. She reached out hesitantly, then withdrew her hand. Thomas, I'm so sorry. Not your fault. With visible effort, he raised his hand to capture hers. They want us afraid, Eliza, want us separated. It's working, she admitted quietly. I am afraid for you. Dr. Simmons cleared his throat. He needs rest. I've given him laudanum for the pain, which should be taking effect soon. Can he be moved? Vernon asked. My place isn't far. He could stay in the spare room until he's stronger. The doctor looked doubtful. Movement will be painful with those ribs. I've had worse, Thomas said, struggling to sit up. And I don't fancy being a sitting target if Blackstone's men decide to finish what they started. With Vernon and the sheriff's help, Thomas managed to stand, grimacing but determined. The short walk to Vernon's house was slow and clearly agonizing for him, but he refused to stop or complain. Once they had him settled in the small room adjacent to Eliza's, Dr. Simmons provided additional laudanum and instructions for his care. Keep him still for at least 3 days, the doctor advised. Those ribs need time to start healing. Change the bandages twice daily and watch for signs of infection. After the doctor and sheriff departed, Vernon pulled Eliza aside. This changes things, he said gravely. Having him here puts both of you in danger. Would you have me turn him away? Eliza challenged. No, Vernon sighed. But we need to be realistic. Blackstone won't stop at this, and the town is already whispering that Thomas's beating is proof of the curse. That's absurd. Absurd or not, it's what they believe. Vernon ran a hand through his thinning hair. Get some rest, girl. Tomorrow we'll need to make decisions. Eliza didn't sleep. Instead, she sat beside Thomas's bed through the night, changing the cold compress on his forehead when fever threatened and helping him sip water when he woke disoriented from the laudanum. By dawn, dark circles shadowed her eyes, but her resolve had hardened into something unbreakable. When Vernon rose for breakfast, he found her at the kitchen table writing in a small notebook. You look terrible, he observed, putting coffee on to boil. Thank you, she replied dryly. How reassuring. Did you sleep at all? No, but I've been thinking. She pushed the notebook toward him. These are the supplies we'll need. Vernon glanced at the list, his eyebrows rising. Supplies for what exactly? For leaving Sloan. Eliza met his gaze steadily. Thomas and I, as soon as he's well enough to travel, and go where? His ranch to start. Then, I don't know. Somewhere people don't believe in curses. Vernon sank into a chair. Eliza, think about what you're saying. You barely know this man. I know he's the only person in this town who stood up for me without hesitation. I know he's kind and honorable and doesn't deserve what's happening to him because of me. She took a deep breath. And I know that I care for him, more than I should, perhaps, given the time we've known each other, but it's true nonetheless. And what about Thomas? Has he agreed to this plan? Not yet, but he will. Vernon studied her for a long moment, seeing perhaps for the first time not his brother's bereaved daughter but a woman with a will of her own. Finally, he nodded. All right, I'll help you get what you need, but you should know Blackstone won't let Thomas go easily. He'll see it as defiance. It is defiance, Eliza replied simply. Later that morning, as she changed Thomas's bandages, she outlined her plan. He listened without interruption, his eyes never leaving her face. You've thought this through, he said when she finished. As best I could, given the circumstances, and you're certain about leaving everything behind. His gaze was searching. Your uncle, the life you could build here. What life? Eliza's hands stilled on the fresh bandage. They've made it clear I'm not welcome. And now they've hurt you because of me. Thomas captured her wrist gently. If we do this, if we leave together, there will be talk. Your reputation, my reputation is already in tatters, she said with a rueful smile. Besides, I've never much cared for the opinions of people who judge without knowledge. There's something else to consider. Thomas shifted, wincing at the movement. I don't have much to offer you, Eliza. My ranch is small, the work is hard, and I'll never be accepted by proper society. Is that a proposal, Mr. Navarro? She asked, her attempt at lightness betrayed by the tremor in her voice. It's a warning, he replied seriously. And a question, because if we do this, I want it to be with clear eyes and open hearts. He reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face. I'm falling in love with you, Eliza Keller, against all sense and reason, but I won't ask you to share my life unless it's truly what you want. The simple honesty of his declaration made her breath catch. I want a life where I'm not defined by others' fears, she said softly. Where I can build something meaningful with someone who sees me for who I am. She turned her hand to lace her fingers with his. I'm falling in love with you too, Thomas, and that's the most sensible thing I've done since coming to Wyoming. His smile transformed his battered face. Then we'll go. As soon as I can ride without passing out. Vernon agreed to help them prepare, though his concern was evident. Over the next 3 days, he discreetly purchased the supplies on Eliza's list while she tended to Thomas, whose strength returned gradually but steadily. On the 4th day, as Eliza was hanging laundry in the yard, she heard the unmistakable sound of approaching horses. Peering around the corner of the house, she saw Samuel Blackstone dismounting in front, flanked by 4 of his men, including the sneering Calhoun. Vernon Keller, Blackstone called out, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of a man accustomed to having his orders obeyed. I understand you're harboring a fugitive. Vernon appeared in the doorway of his shop, wiping his hands on a rag. No fugitives here, Blackstone. Just family and a guest recovering from an unfortunate incident. Navarro trespassed on my property, Blackstone lied smoothly, stole a valuable horse. My men were merely attempting to apprehend him when he resisted violently. That's not what the sheriff believes, Vernon replied evenly. The sheriff is welcome to his beliefs, ideal in facts. Blackstone's cold gaze swept the property. Where is he? Resting. Doctor's orders. I'll need to speak with him. Vernon's stance shifted subtly, blocking the entrance to his shop more completely. Not today, Blackstone. Come back with the sheriff and a warrant if you've got legitimate business. Eliza had never seen her mild-mannered uncle so resolute. Blackstone's expression darkened. You're making a mistake, blacksmith. This town depends on my business, my goodwill. This town survived before you came and will survive after you're gone, Vernon countered. For a tense moment, Blackstone seemed ready to force his way past. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled a cold, calculating expression that sent a chill down Eliza's spine. Very well. We'll do this the civilized way. He turned to his men. Calhoun, ride to the sheriff's office. Inform him I'm officially charging Thomas Navarro with horse theft and trespassing. The rest of you remain here. Ensure our fugitive doesn't wander off. As Calhoun rode away, Eliza ducked back around the corner and hurried inside through the kitchen door. Thomas was already up, pulling on a shirt despite the obvious pain it caused him. I heard, he said before she could speak. We need to leave. Now. You're not strong enough. I'm strong enough to know what Blackstone will do once he has me in custody. Thomas's expression was grim. The charges are fabricated, but that won't matter. I'll have an accident before I ever see trial. Eliza knew he was right. The horses are ready at the livery, but Blackstone's men are watching the house. Is there another way out? She thought quickly. The root cellar. It connects to old storage tunnels under the buildings from when this was a mining town. My uncle showed me when I first arrived, said they were used during Indian raids years ago. Where do they lead? Several exits, including one near the livery. She was already gathering essential supplies into a small bag. But Thomas, your ribs will have to endure, he finished, jaw set with determination. Get your uncle, we'll need his help to pull this off. Vernon joined them moments later, his expression grave. Blackstone's serious this time, I've never seen him like this. We're leaving, Thomas said without preamble. Now, through the tunnels. To his credit, Vernon didn't argue. I'll create a distraction, give you time to get to the livery and away. He clasped Thomas's shoulder carefully. Take care of her. With my life, Thomas promised. The entrance to the root cellar was hidden beneath a trapdoor in the pantry floor. Vernon helped Thomas descend the narrow ladder, wincing at the younger man's stifled grunts of pain. Eliza followed, a lantern in one hand and the small bag of essentials in the other. The tunnel entrance is behind the shelves on the north wall, Vernon instructed. Follow it straight for about 200 yards, then take the first right. That'll lead you up near Becker's old tannery, just a stone's throw from the livery. What about you? Eliza asked, suddenly reluctant to leave her only remaining family. I'll be fine, Vernon assured her. Blackstone can't touch me without turning the town against him completely. I'm too well established. Come with us, she urged. Vernon shook his head. My place is here. But I'll visit once things settle down. He embraced her briefly. Your father would be proud of your courage, girl. Now go before they get suspicious. The tunnel was low and narrow, forcing them to proceed in a hunched position that clearly taxed Thomas's injured ribs. Eliza led the way, the lantern casting eerie shadows on the rough-hewn walls. The air was stale but breathable, heavy with the scent of earth and time. How did you know? Thomas asked as they navigated the dark passage. That you could trust me, I mean. Eliza glanced back at him. The same way you knew you could trust me, I suppose. Some things don't require explanation, just recognition. Their progress was slower than Eliza had hoped, Thomas's injuries forcing frequent pauses. When they finally reached the junction Vernon had described, they heard a commotion above them shouting, the crash of something heavy falling. Your uncle's distraction, Thomas murmured. Let's move. The side tunnel sloped upward, eventually ending at a wooden hatch secured from the inside with a rusted iron bar. Eliza struggled with it briefly before Thomas gently moved her aside, putting his shoulder against the bar despite the pain it must have caused him. With a groan of protesting metal, the bar gave way, allowing them to push the hatch open. They emerged in a dilapidated storage shed behind what had once been the tannery. Through gaps in the warped boards, Eliza could see the livery stable across a small stretch of open ground. Wait here, Thomas said, peering through the gaps. Let me make sure it's clear. We go together, Eliza countered. I won't have you facing danger alone again. The stubborn set of her jaw brooked no argument. With a resigned nod, Thomas took her hand and they slipped from the shed, staying close to the buildings as they made their way toward the livery. The stable boy, a youngster of about 14 named Daniel, was the only person present when they entered. His eyes widened at the sight of them. Miss Keller, Mr. Navarro, everyone's talking about, we know, Daniel, Eliza interrupted gently. We need our horses, quickly and quietly. The boy looked uncertain. Mr. Blackstone's men were asking after Mr. Navarro's horse earlier, said I wasn't to let anyone take it. Thomas reached into his pocket and withdrew a silver dollar. Daniel, I've known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper. Have I ever lied to you? No, sir. Then believe me when I say Blackstone is lying. I never stole anything from him. Thomas pressed the coin into the boy's hand. Help us and this stays between us. Daniel pocketed the dollar and nodded. Your horses are saddled and ready. Mr. Keller arranged it this morning, said it was for a delivery. Smart man, your uncle, Thomas murmured to Eliza. Within minutes, they were mounted Thomas with obvious difficulty but grim determination and slipping out the back entrance of the livery. Instead of taking the main road, Thomas led them along a narrow trail that skirted the edge of town, keeping to the cover of trees wherever possible. "We'll circle around to approach my place from the north," he explained as they put distance between themselves and Sloane. "Blackstone will expect us to take the direct route west." They rode hard for nearly 2 hours, the pace clearly taxing Thomas's endurance but necessary to ensure their lead. When they finally paused to rest the horses by a small stream, Eliza could see the toll it had taken on him. His face was ashen, his shirt dark with sweat. "Let me check your bandages," she insisted, helping him dismount. "Later," he said, though he leaned heavily against his saddle. "We need to keep moving." "Not if it kills you," she replied firmly. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking." Reluctantly, he allowed her to examine his ribs. The bandages remained in place, but a small spot of blood had seeped through where the constant movement had aggravated his wounds. "It's nothing," he insisted, seeing her concern. "Just opened a bit, it'll close again." Eliza rewrapped the bandages as best she could, her hands gentle but efficient. "You're the most stubborn man I've ever met, Thomas Navarro." A faint smile touched his lips. "Says the woman who defied an entire town." They continued at a more moderate pace, taking less traveled paths through terrain that grew increasingly rugged. By late afternoon, they crested a ridge that offered a view of Thomas's hidden valley, the cabin a tiny dot in the distance. "Almost home," Thomas said, his voice rough with exhaustion but tinged with relief. As they approached the valley entrance, however, Thomas suddenly reined his horse to a stop, raising a hand for silence. Eliza followed his gaze and saw what had alarmed him: fresh hoofprints in the soft earth of the trail. "Someone's here," he whispered. "Recently. Blackstone or his men?" Thomas's expression hardened. "Wait here, let me check." "Thomas, please, Eliza. If there's trouble, I need to know you're safe." He dismounted carefully, drawing his revolver from its holster. "If you hear shooting, ride east toward the mountains. There's a Shoshone settlement about 15 miles on. Ask for Running Elk. He was a friend of my mother's. He'll help you." Before she could protest further, he disappeared into the underbrush, moving with surprising stealth despite his injuries. Eliza waited, heart pounding, every sound in the gathering dusk making her start. Minutes stretched interminably. Just as she was about to follow Thomas against his instructions, he reappeared, holstering his weapon. "It's clear," he said, relief evident in his voice. "They've been here, ransacked the cabin, but they're gone. Probably left men watching the main trail, expecting us to come that way." Together, they rode down into the valley, approaching the cabin cautiously. As Thomas had said, it had been searched thoroughly, furniture overturned and belongings scattered. But the structure itself was undamaged, and the horses in the corral appeared unharmed. "Could be worse," Thomas observed as they surveyed the damage. "They didn't burn it down, at least." Eliza helped him right the overturned table and chairs while he checked that his most valuable possessions, including a box containing his mother's few keepsakes, were intact. By the time they had restored some semblance of order, night had fallen, and Thomas's strength was clearly flagging. "You need rest," Eliza insisted, steering him toward the bed, which she had remade with fresh linens found in a chest. "I'll keep watch." Too exhausted to argue, Thomas allowed her to help him lie down. As she turned to leave, his hand caught hers. "Stay," he murmured, already half asleep. "Please." After a moment's hesitation, Eliza slipped off her shoes and lay down beside him, careful not to jostle his injured side. In the darkness, his arm encircled her waist, drawing her closer. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "For everything." Eliza covered his hand with hers. "Sleep, Thomas, we're safe now." But even as she said the words, she wondered if they were true. Blackstone was not a man who would easily accept defeat, and they had defied him publicly. This sanctuary might be temporary at best. Morning brought new challenges. Thomas's fever had returned during the night, his body finally rebelling against the exertion of their escape. Eliza used the last of her clean handkerchiefs as cold compresses, anxiety growing as the fever persisted throughout the day. By evening, she had made a decision. Checking that Thomas was sleeping, she scribbled a note explaining her absence, then saddled Willow and rode out of the valley. Instead of heading for Sloan, however, she turned east, following Thomas's directions to the Shoshone settlement. The moon was high by the time she spotted the glow of campfires through the trees. As she approached, two mounted braves intercepted her, hands resting meaningfully on their weapons. "I seek Running Elk," she called out, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "Thomas Navarro sent me." The men exchanged glances before one nodded, gesturing for her to follow. They led her into a small encampment of perhaps 15 lodges, where curious faces emerged to observe the unexpected visitor. An older man with long gray streaked hair approached, his bearing dignified despite the simple clothes he wore. "I am Running Elk," he said in accented but clear English. "You speak of Thomas Navarro?" "Yes." Eliza dismounted awkwardly, stiff from the long ride. "He's injured. Fever has set in. He said you were a friend of his mother's." Running Elk's weathered face softened slightly at the mention of Thomas's mother. "Little Bird was my cousin's daughter." "Where is her son?" "At his ranch in the Hidden Valley. Men from town attacked him because of me." The old man studied her intently. "You are his woman." Eliza flushed but met his gaze directly. "I hope to be." A slight smile touched Running Elk's lips. "Honest answer." "Come, we will help." Within an hour, Eliza was riding back toward Thomas's valley, accompanied by Running Elk and a younger woman named Morning Star, who carried a deerskin pouch of herbs and medicines. They arrived just before dawn to find Thomas awake and attempting to saddle his horse, clearly intending to search for Eliza. "You're supposed to be resting," she chided as she hurried to his side, supporting him as he swayed on his feet. "You were gone," he said simply, his eyes fever-bright but relieved. "I thought Blackstone. I went for help." She nodded toward Running Elk and Morning Star, who were dismounting nearby. "Thomas, this is Running Elk and Morning Star." Thomas straightened as much as his injuries allowed, inclining his head respectfully. "Baj Nitsu," he said, speaking words Eliza didn't understand. Running Elk responded in the same language before switching to English. "Little Bird's son has grown strong. But now he is wounded and needs healing." The older man gestured to Morning Star. "My daughter knows the old medicines. She will help." Under Morning Star's direction, they helped Thomas back into the cabin. The young woman examined his injuries with practiced hands, her expression grave as she noted the heat radiating from his skin. "Infection," she pronounced. "In the cut on his side, must draw it out." For the next 2 days, Thomas drifted in and out of consciousness as Morning Star applied poultices of herbs and roots to his wounds. Eliza rarely left his side, sleeping in brief snatches and helping Morning Star change the bandages and coax broth between Thomas's cracked lips. Running Elk, meanwhile, set guards at the valley entrance, 2 young braves who would warn them if Blackstone's men approached. He also repaired some of the damage to the cabin and tended to Thomas's horses, his efficient movements belying his age. On the 3rd night, as Eliza dozed in a chair beside Thomas's bed, she was startled awake by his voice clear and coherent for the first time since her return. "You came back," he said softly. Eliza moved to sit on the edge of the bed, her hand finding his. "Of course I came back." "You could have kept riding, found somewhere safer." "There is nowhere I would rather be than here with you," she replied honestly. "Besides, I made a promise." His hand tightened around hers. "What promise?" "To share your curse proudly." She smiled, brushing damp hair from his forehead. "Your fever's broken." In the dim lamplight, his eyes shone with an emotion that made her heart race. "I love you, Eliza Keller. If that's a curse, I'll gladly bear it. And I love you, Thomas Navarro." She leaned forward to press a gentle kiss to his lips, curse and all. The next morning, Morning Star pronounced Thomas on the road to recovery, though she warned it would be weeks before his ribs fully healed. As the young woman packed her medicines, Eliza drew her aside. "I can never repay you for what you've done," she said sincerely. Morning Star smiled, the expression transforming her serious face. "You make Little Bird's son happy. That is payment enough." After sharing a meal of venison stew provided by Running Elk, the Shoshone prepared to depart. As they mounted their horses, Running Elk turned to Thomas and Eliza. Blackstone will not give up easily, he warned. His pride is wounded and such men are dangerous. What should we do? Eliza asked. Be vigilant, but also live your lives. The old man's eyes twinkled. Perhaps make it official, yes. Among my people, a man and woman who face danger together are already considered bound. Thomas glanced at Eliza, a question in his eyes. She nodded, feeling a certainty that transcended the brevity of their acquaintance. Would you perform the ceremony? Thomas asked, running elk. When I'm able to stand without assistance, the old man nodded approvingly. It would honor little bird's memory to see her son happy. Send word when you are ready. After their Shoshone friends departed, Thomas and Eliza settled into a routine as he recovered. She learned to tend the horses under his instruction, to hunt small game with the rifle he taught her to shoot, and to identify the wild plants that supplemented their dwindling supplies. We'll need to go to a town eventually, Thomas admitted one evening as they shared a simple dinner. Not Sloan, but perhaps Boulder City, 40 miles south. They don't know us there. Is it safe? Eliza asked. Safer than Sloan, and necessary. We need flour, coffee, ammunition. He reached across the table to take her hand, and a proper ring if you're still willing to make this permanent. I am, she assured him, her heart full. Though I don't need a ring to know I belong with you. 2 weeks passed peacefully. Thomas's strength returned gradually, allowing him to take over more of the ranch duties, though Eliza insisted on helping. They received occasional visits from running Elks braves, who brought fresh game and news from the outside world. It was through them that they learned Blackstone had put a bounty on Thomas, $500, for information leading to his capture for alleged horse theft. The news was troubling but not unexpected. He won't stop, Thomas said grimly as they discussed the development. Not until he has what he wants. What does he want, truly? Eliza asked. Is it really just your land? Thomas was silent for a long moment. It's power, control. The knowledge that no one defies Samuel Blackstone and prospers. He met her gaze steadily. And now it's you too. You stood against him publicly, and in his mind that cannot go unpunished. Then what do? We could leave, Thomas suggested reluctantly. Sell the ranch, head farther west. California, perhaps, or north to Montana. Is that what you want? He shook his head slowly. No, this land was my mother's dream, a place where her children could live in peace, belonging to neither world but creating something new. I don't want to abandon it. Then we stay, Eliza said simply. And we fight if we must. Thomas pulled her into a gentle embrace, mindful of his healing ribs. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever known, Eliza Keller. Soon to be Eliza Navarro, she reminded him with a smile, if the offer still stands. His answer was a kiss that left no doubt about his intentions. The following week, with Thomas now able to ride without pain, they made the journey to Boulder City for supplies. The small mining town was bustling with activity, its single street crowded with wagons and riders. No one gave them a second glance as they purchased necessities from the general store and arranged for mail delivery through a private courier who served the outlying ranches. Their last stop was a small jewelry shop where Thomas selected a simple gold band, insisting that Eliza choose something she truly liked rather than the first ring offered. It will be on your finger for the rest of our lives, he said softly as she hesitated over the selection. It should bring you joy each time you look at it. She finally settled on a delicate band set with a small emerald, not ostentatious, but beautiful in its simplicity. Thomas paid without revealing that it had cost nearly all of their remaining funds, but Eliza saw the transaction and squeezed his hand in silent gratitude. As they prepared to leave town, a weathered man in a marshal's uniform approached them outside the general store. Thomas Navarro. He asked, his hand resting casually near his sidearm. Thomas tensed, but his voice remained steady. I am Marshal James Thornton. The man offered his hand, which Thomas shook cautiously. Got a wire from Sheriff Adams over in Sloan a few days back. Thought you should see it. He handed Thomas a folded paper. As Thomas read, his expression changed from wariness to surprise. What is it? Eliza asked, anxiety knotting her stomach. Samuel Blackstone is dead, Thomas said, passing her the telegram, shot in his own study. They found evidence linking him to cattle rustling and land fraud. Who shot him? Unknown, according to this. But Sheriff Adams wants me to know the charges against me have been dropped. Seems one of Blackstone's men, Calhoun, confessed that the horse theft accusation was fabricated. Marshal Thornton cleared his throat. Sheriff mentioned you might pass through Boulder City. Asked me to let you know it's safe to return to Sloan if you've a mind to. Thomas exchanged a glance with Eliza. We appreciate the information, Marshal, but I think we'll stay where we are for now. After restocking their supplies, they returned to the ranch, both processing the unexpected news. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson, Eliza broke the contemplative silence. Do you think we'll ever know who killed Blackstone? Thomas shrugged. Does it matter? The man made enemies everywhere he went. I suppose not. She leaned against his shoulder. What happens now? Now, Thomas smiled, wrapping an arm around her. Now we live, Eliza. We build something here that's ours. We face whatever comes together. 2 days later, Running Elk arrived with several members of his family for the wedding ceremony. They brought gifts of beautifully tanned hides, beaded moccasins for both Thomas and Eliza, and food for the celebration. The ceremony itself was simple but profound. Standing beside the stream that ran through the heart of the valley, with the mountains rising majestically in the background, Eliza and Thomas exchanged vows in both English and Shoshone. Running Elk blessed their union with prayers to the spirits of earth and sky, binding their hands with a beaded cord that symbolized their connection. What the Creator has joined, let no man put asunder, the old man concluded, using the Christian phrase in acknowledgement of Eliza's background. Thomas slipped the emerald ring onto Eliza's finger before kissing her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. The small gathering erupted in cheers and songs as the late afternoon sun bathed everything in golden light. That night, after their guests had departed, Thomas and Eliza lay together in the quiet darkness of their cabin, now truly husband and wife in every sense. As Eliza drifted toward sleep, content in Thomas's arms, he whispered against her hair. Do you remember what I said that day in town? When Calhoun and his friends were taunting us, you said you would share my curse proudly, she murmured. I meant it then. I mean it even more now. His fingers traced the curve of her cheek. If loving you is a curse, then I am the most fortunate cursed man alive. Eliza smiled, pressing closer to him. Then we are cursed together, Thomas Navarro, forever. Forever, he agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss. 1 year later, Eliza stood on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching as Thomas demonstrated horse training techniques to a small group of ranchers who had traveled from as far as Montana to learn from him. Their business had grown steadily since word spread of Thomas's skill with even the most difficult horses. Vernon had visited twice, bringing news from Sloan. After Blackstone's death, many of the town's more oppressive practices had faded. The curse, it seemed, had been forgotten or at least set aside in favor of more practical concerns. As the afternoon lesson concluded, Thomas sent his students off to practice with the younger horses while he walked up to join Eliza on the porch. His smile when he saw her still made her heart race, even after a year of marriage. How are my girls today? He asked, placing a gentle hand on her rounded belly. Restless, Eliza replied with a laugh. I think she's practicing to become a horse trainer like her father. Thomas raised an eyebrow. So certain it's a daughter, Morning Star says so, and I've learned not to doubt her instincts. Eliza leaned into his embrace. Though I'll be equally happy with a son. As long as she or he is healthy, that's all that matters. Thomas pressed a kiss to her temple. I received a letter from your uncle this morning. He's considering selling his blacksmith shop and moving closer to us. Really, that's wonderful news. He says Sloan isn't the same without you to enliven it. Thomas chuckled. Apparently Mrs. Holbrook actually asked after you last time he was in the store. Wonders never cease, Eliza murmured, remembering the woman's hostility. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, casting long shadows across their valley, Thomas took Eliza's hand, his thumb brushing over the emerald ring that symbolized their bond. Any regrets? He asked softly. About the path you chose. Eliza looked out over the land, they had cultivated together the expanded corral now filled with horses in various stages of training, the vegetable garden bursting with late summer produce, the small orchard they had planted that would someday provide fruit for their children. "Not one," she replied honestly. "I found my home, Thomas, not just this place but with you." He smiled, the love in his eyes unmistakable. "Then I'd say we've turned our curse into quite a blessing." "The best kind," Eliza agreed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him as the golden light of evening transformed their world into something magical, something entirely their own. 3 years later, on a crisp autumn morning, Eliza stood in the doorway of their cabin, watching as Thomas taught their daughter, Sarah, to brush a gentle old mare. At 3 years old, Sarah was already showing signs of inheriting her father's affinity for horses, her small face serious with concentration as she mimicked Thomas's careful movements. Beside Eliza, nestled in a sling across her chest, their 6-month-old son, James, slept peacefully. Life in the valley had settled into a rhythm of work and love that fulfilled her in ways she had never imagined possible back in Ohio. Vernon had indeed sold his blacksmith shop in Sloan and built a small cabin on the edge of their property, where he spent his days crafting intricate ironwork that had become sought after throughout the territory. His presence had been a blessing, especially during Eliza's difficult pregnancy with James. As she watched her family, Eliza reflected on the journey that had brought her here from a grief-stricken young woman facing hostility in a strange town to a wife, mother, and partner in a thriving ranch. The curse that had once threatened to define her had instead led her to the greatest happiness of her life. Thomas looked up, catching her gaze across the yard. The smile that spread across his face held the same warmth, the same promise it had from the beginning. "Come join us," he called. "Sarah wants to show you something." As Eliza stepped into the sunlight, moving toward the family they had created against all odds, she knew with absolute certainty that some curses were worth embracing, especially when shared with someone who saw not misfortune, but possibility in every challenge they faced together.